All right, we all set, Dana? Good. Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to our next session of Cloud 101, realizing the true potential of cloud media operations. It's great to see you all here again. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat and I'll be taking them at the end of this presentation. So I think we're all set here, Dana. We good to go? Perfect. All right, thank you. So this is a session we're doing in 6 chapters. The first two we've already done, introduction, why the cloud, and is the cloud there yet? And this one is cloud migration challenges. And after this, we'll have another couple of presentations on recipe for successful migration and cloud system case studies. And finally, a special bonus presentation on transformation in the cloud. So this one is on cloud migration challenges. So in this one, we're going to talk about your cloud migration journey and selecting the right partners to go on that journey with you. And then this transition is more than just about technology. So let's get into the meat here. So cloud migration journey. And first hint is that this is a journey. It never really ends. You're always going to be expanding and doing what you do in the cloud because that is why you go to the cloud. It enables this constant innovation and this constant ability to change to meet changing circumstances and business models and adapt new technologies and such. So once you start on this journey, don't expect it to stop tomorrow. This will continue forever and ever. So we look at how we go on this journey. And basically, there are 5 different levels of this pyramid for the journey. And the first one is about, will it work? The second one is beginning the transformation. The third is end-to-end migration. The fourth is reinvent and optimize. And the top of the pyramid is realizing the full cloud potential. And as you migrate through this pyramid, as you go up higher and higher, you're actually going to accelerate faster as you go through this. The first stage is definitely going to be the hardest and the first couple ones. So let's take a look at that first stage. So first stage is to prove the cloud viability for what you want to do. So the first step is to define the vision and purpose and form the teams for this project. It's really essential that you define your vision up front and the purpose for what you're trying to do. A lot of people I've seen, companies want to go to the cloud. They feel like they have to go to the cloud. They need to go to the cloud, but they haven't really defined what they're trying to get out of it and the purpose for why they're going to the cloud. And it's really important you establish that up front because that's the only way you'll be sure you've actually achieved your objectives. The next step is to evaluate the different opportunities within your organization for migrating to the cloud. We call that portfolio discovery and planning. And basically, it's all the different parts of your workflow or your media organization that you can move to the cloud. Which are the ones that are most important to move to the cloud, and which are the ones that are going to give you the most return? And the goal here is to seek easy, quick wins. What is it that I could move to the cloud today where I will get immediate benefit from and real value from? And start with those. So once you've gone through that process, the next step is to begin the transformation. And the transformation first is to really own this process. Okay, it's really important that as you go through this transformation, that everybody on your team is involved and owns this. And it involves actually changing cultures and companies. This is more than technology. It's more than business. This is also about culture because you're going to have to break down silos. You're going to have to get different groups working together. And the first step in doing that is creating this cloud center of excellence. And this is where you bring people from every different department together to work together on this project. So you need someone from programming and someone from marketing and someone from the business side and someone from the IT side and people from the engineering side and the media workflow side, all to come together to really make this work, scheduling and traffic, advertising, whatever. You're going to need different groups to come together to make this work. And really ideally what you want is one person from each group who's assigned to this cloud center of excellence to really lead this transformation effort. You need executive leadership support. If you don't have that, you're not going to get there. You're going to need support from the very high level, and they need to understand the mission and the vision to do that and to really enable this cross-functional leadership and the teams integrated across these silos. The next step is to establish tenets and best practices, and these are going to be the rules of the road that define how you transition to the cloud. From there, you're going to want to build a cost modeling worksheet. Understanding the costs of the cloud is extremely complex. There are a lot of variables, and those variables are not just the cloud itself, moving media back and forth, but they're also the costs from all the different vendors and participants you're going to have to work with in the cloud. And if you can't model all that, then you're going to have a really hard time making sure that you manage those costs and you're delivering the transformation you need. That also makes it affordable. So building that worksheet is really key. It's also very difficult and complex. And so having done that, and they're very large spreadsheets, but it's important to do that because you'll discover in doing that there are immense differences in the way you can do certain things. And only through understanding that will you realize what the best route is to achieve your objectives. So, and then lastly, from that, you also understand which are the right partners to work with you on this project. So what are those tenets we're talking about here? So these are your own. These are the tenets you must come up with. These are just some sample ones. These are not necessarily the ones you should use, but things like securing all content at rest and in flight, because content security is very important to you. Or maybe some organizations' content security is less important because they're going to make it publicly available anyway in very short time. So it doesn't matter as much as somebody who has very high value content, and that content is also has subscription and associated with it. That means that value is even more important. And then creating standards-based and open source workflows. So you really want to be able to use standards to interconnect the different parts of your workflow, right? This helps you in not only making sure all the vendors work together, but also allowing you to build workflows where each module in that workflow becomes a replaceable object, basically, in the workflow, because the way they connect to other parts are through standards that are available, so that therefore you don't have to worry about having to go into development every time you want to change out one module for somebody else's module because you found something better. You're going to want to have metrics around surface level agreements and reliability. You're going to have to define what user and group access and rights are. You're going to decide how fast you need to provision systems. How important is it to be able to spin up things quickly, or these very persistent workflows? You're going to need to remove all the barriers you have to consumption of the media. What is getting in the way of actually implementing these workflows and actually using the cloud? You're going to need to educate your staff, create a culture of experimentation. You're in the cloud. You're not having to build infrastructure anymore that you're having to put a lot of CapEx and effort into before you get to test. So you can actually experiment in the cloud, try something. If you don't like it, throw it away, and your costs are relatively negligible in the scheme of things. So do create that culture of experimentation. You should also have a cloud-first strategy. And this is actually something I see a lot of companies not do. And it bothers me, honestly, because if you're moving to the cloud, chances are the companies you're working with, whatever they do in the cloud, will also work really well in a virtual machine environment or dedicated hardware environment on premises. But the opposite is not true. The same software that works really well on premises may not work very well or even at all in the cloud. So if you don't test first in the cloud and build the workflow first in the cloud, even if you want to build a parallel workflow on premises or even a primary workflow on premises, then you'll never really know whether you're building a solution that will also take you into the cloud. But if you start with a cloud, I think the odds are much higher that whatever you want to do on premises will also work equally as well. The next one is a hybrid strategy. Do you want to be able to run on premises and in the cloud? Do you want to be able to run in multiple clouds or multiple regions within a cloud? What is your redundancy strategy around that? And what is your reason for wanting to do those different workflows in different places? They're going to create a lot of challenges if your answer is yes to any of those questions. So you need to understand the ramifications of those and make those decisions. And lastly, one of my favorite tenets is to automate everything. Every part of the workflow should be automatable. Every part of the workflow should have a process, inputs and outputs, and results, and you should be able to automate that process so you know where you have breakdowns in the system, and you're not putting manual effort in places where it's not required. So those are tenets. You're going to have your own, but these are ideas of what tenets might look like in moving to the cloud. So now we start the migration. So first step is we build for scale and we validate. So we build an end-to-end workflow, we test it, we scale it up, we see if it works at scale before we start actually using it on air and deploying it. We actually test this, and it's not unusual. I've seen where customers will spin up workflows that are like 300 times the size of a simple workflow to simply make sure that it will scale so they don't find a breakdown point later in how that scales. You're going to want to simplify and streamline and reduce friction in all of your workflows. And you're going to really find this is where your tenants have value, because you're going to have this cloud first mentality. You're going to have this blue sky mentality where you're not going to bring all that baggage with you of your current workflows, but you're going to define what the ideal workflow would be in the cloud, build that workflow, and then figure out how do I migrate my existing content and workflow into that, rather than bringing those old workflows that are based on legacy technologies and hardware and content and everything else with you. Create that culture of experimentation we talked about and evolution, where you have this fail fast mentality, and be prepared to break rules and make new ones on a constant basis. So now we're into the migration stage. And once you've migrated your workflows to cloud and you're actually running to cloud, then you can really look to how do I get to the next level? How do I really reinvent what I do and optimize what I'm doing? And this is where cloud native applications really come into play, because they bring you the best of the cloud and they also bring you the economy of the cloud correctly. So you really want to make sure that at this point that you're actually looking for cloud native applications and cloud native services. Part of this is building infrastructure as code, where you're automatically provisioning parts of your workflow. You're scaling things up and down on demand. You're automating the failover and being able to do rapid cold starts. Key to this also is right sizing instance sizes to make costs right and to keep manage those, and also to be using things like on demand and serverless, where instead of even actually spinning up servers, you're actually just running code in the cloud. In AWS, they call that Lambda, in a serverless environment. So you're not even actually running your own servers. That's where you really get cost control. And finally, you get to the top. And everybody, you see all these presentations, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. But truthfully, that's at the top of this pyramid, because to really leverage that, you already have to have the content in the cloud. You have to have the workflows in the cloud. You have to have it where it actually brings you benefit. And to build a model for artificial intelligence, you actually need to have a volume of content in which to build a model against. So you're not going to build that from day one. So really, this lives at the top of the pyramid. It's aspirational. And there's some AI and ML you can do early on. The real benefits won't come until you've done the rest of these workflows and you're at the top of this pyramid. Because here's where you really start to leverage cloud capabilities. You'll be able to connect to partners with a frictionless way of doing this to exchange data and manage things. Everything from billing and bookkeeping to digital rights management to content sharing and processing can all be done with partners, and it'll all be part of a seamless workflow because you're all working in the same environment. And you're not even moving content, you're actually just changing metadata around content to define where you are now in these workflows. So your partners will be able to come in and actually work on content directly in your own storage environment without even having to move it in and out. You'll be able to create new business models out of this. And you'll benefit from things like your archives and long tail content that before were not monetizable, because now you'll be able to move them to the cloud, you'll be able to make them available to consumers, and you'll be able to use AI and machine learning to actually be able to attach metadata to that really will let you leverage that content. And finally, you'll be able to build things with really highly targeted services for audiences, where you can actually pinpoint the content or the advertising or other things you want to deliver to certain audiences, or maybe even change the way the content appears to different viewers, because it's all there and because that potential is there. And because the technologies around things like HLS delivery make things like that possible, that with transport streams and typical on-premises systems were never possible before. So getting to the top of the pyramid is going to open a whole lot of potential, a whole lot of opportunity. But there's a lot of work and a lot of stages to get there. You don't want to take shortcuts in that process. So we've talked about how you migrate to the cloud as a customer of the cloud and move your media workflows to the cloud. But you know what? There's someone else on this journey with you along for the ride. And who is that? Well, that is your partners. Your partners are going there with you. And so your partners are a range of partners, everybody from maybe the cloud vendor itself or consultants, but they're also technology suppliers you're choosing to use to run your workflows in the cloud and to help you get there. So when you choose the right partners, you're probably going to find people with experience in the cloud to help you in this process. They could be consultants, they could be cloud systems integrators, and they could actually be the cloud vendor itself, which often has cloud solutions architects and a support team that are more than happy to help you and give really good guidance on this. You have your technology suppliers, your application vendors, and this is really key, and we're going to talk about this a lot coming up here. And finally, the question I'm going to ask you now that we're going to talk about is, where are your partners in their own migration to the cloud? Where are they along this journey? Because this is really key. You need to align your journey and their journey. So if you look at this from a vendor perspective, a vendor is already making technology. They've already got solutions. They've already built software, right? And so for them, the first step is this concept of lift and shift, and then making it viable in the cloud, and then leveraging the cloud capabilities, and finally becoming cloud native and fully becoming cloud optimized. So how can you tell where a vendor is and what does this look like for them? Because if you understand what they're going through, it'll be a better experience for you too as a media organization. So let's take a look at this, lift and shift. This is a relatively pejorative term, but it means basically taking your existing software application, which is generally a monolithic application designed to run on a server, where you cram as much as you can into that server to do all the different things you want to do. So it's just a server running, which is the most simple way to launch something for a customer. You know, here's a server. This is a playout server. Here's a server. This is a translator. Here's a server that does a function and does everything that's needed to make that part work, right, in your workflow. But that's a monolithic application, and that doesn't scale well in the cloud. And so this is typically what you see is they take these monolithic applications as a first step, and they make it work in the cloud. And there's certain things you have to fix, like some clouds don't support multicast. Amazon recently started doing this, but no other cloud I know of does this today. And even then, it's complicated and potentially expensive to make work. So often you want to avoid having to use multicast if that's necessary. How are they licensing their system in the cloud? You can't put a USB key in the cloud. You don't necessarily want to connect it to a server on your premises for licensing. That's reliability risk. So what is the licensing mechanism? Do they support S3, which is the native cloud storage? How are you providing reference to the system if you need reference in different kinds of signal formats? And how are you making the signals work in the cloud? So this is all the baseline, the basically making it work functionality, right? And this is where a lot of vendors are still today in moving to the cloud. And you need to look for this, because this is not necessarily going to get you where you want to go on your journey if they're still stuck at this point in their journey. So the next step is making it viable in the cloud. And the first step is building price models. I've seen a lot of vendors offering in the cloud that still have CapEx pricing models. Well, the cloud is an OpEx model, and you're going to want OpEx models. In fact, the ideal OpEx models are ones that actually align with the cloud OpEx models, so that whatever you're doing in the cloud has a parallel consumption and cost from the vendor side, and not these disparate things where one is measured in hours and the other one in weeks or months or years, right? Because that doesn't work very well. As you start doing this analysis, you're also going to figure out what your total cost of ownership time period is. Do you expect the cloud to be cheaper than building an on-premises facility compared to a 36-month total cost of ownership, a 60-month total cost of ownership? This is important to understand, you know, at what point do you think it's break even, where if I had built something on premise and kept it forever and ever, it would be cheaper. And it's not just that, okay, I can keep this for 3 years on premise and now the on-premise system is cheaper than the cloud, but it's also, am I really going to want to run that same workflow and use that same technology 3 years from now as well? Because that's part of the challenge we're facing, is we're an industry in flux. And so we move to the cloud to give us flexibility and agility to constantly change, which also means you go back and look at those license models again. If the licensing model is a lock-in, then it's preventing you from making that change. Understand the supplier's underlying cloud costs. You know, basically that means actually standing up a system and seeing what works, but also asking them what it costs to run a system in the cloud. If they know what it costs to run their system in the cloud and they can tell you exactly what it costs and what you need to run to do it, that's a really good sign. If they can't tell you what to run their system in and how much it's going to cost, it's a pretty strong red flag that they haven't done a cost analysis themselves, much less optimize their solution to manage those costs. Whatever you run in the cloud, you're going to have security and access management around this. So you're going to want to check that and make sure that they offer those parameters for this and they understand how to actually build a secure system in the cloud using their software. And you're going to want to run vulnerability scans against their system running in the cloud to make sure it meets those security requirements. So finally, we're leveraging cloud capabilities. Now it's starting to really hum along here. We've got hopefully service orchestration where we can actually run infrastructure as code. And what that means is I can actually spin up and down servers with simple code. I can actually say I want to spin up a backup system or a disaster recovery system or maybe a whole live production system. And it's just lines of code that's spin up when I need it and stop it when I don't. And I'm only paying for it when I'm absolutely using it. That is the beauty of the cloud, is only paying for the consumption you need. And that requires infrastructure as code. You want to be able to build for scale. You know, part of the future is being able to scale up to big events or being able to have whatever we need to do at that moment in time. And so we need to be able to scale up and also scale down. We need to be able to run our workflows in multiple zones and multiple regions for redundancy. So we need to have systems that support that. And then we also need automated versioning. Ideally, you're going to have something that's automatically updating software versions, running a system in parallel with a new version, letting it testing for a while and failing over to it. And we're going to be able to utilize native cloud services. So we're going to actually leverage the capabilities of that cloud, which often gives us both economy and higher performance. So these are the things we look for from vendors when they're really starting to leverage cloud capabilities. And finally, we get to vendors who are actually cloud native. Now, in the first three tiers, we were talking about vendors who are traditional vendors with existing solutions that were migrating to the cloud. But a cloud native vendor might be someone who started in the cloud and started right here, right? And they started at this level with all those other things as givens. And they wrote their code from day one to be in the cloud. And part of the challenge is, well, someone who's starting at the bottom, working up with existing code, reach to what someone who starts a cloud native does. Because someone who's actually cloud native is likely to build their code as microservices and run in containers, which means that you're able to actually really right size everything you're doing, spin up and spin down things, and manage it very efficiently. You're going to have automated orchestration, scheduling and provisioning of your services, right sizing on demand and serverless. You're going to have really cost efficient auto scaling. You're going to have continuous integration where you're constantly able to upgrade systems while in flight and fail over to the new systems that you've upgraded after testing them seamlessly. And underneath it all, they're going to have a DevOps practices and culture. So what exactly do I mean by DevOps practices and culture? So we look at cloud native and looking at this. It's obviously microservices, and a microservice means it's basically a single function that's decoupled or loosely coupled services. It has open APIs that tell you how to connect to it and control it and monitor it. It scales very well. It can be failover and restarted without having to impact other services running around it. It is stateless and it's disposable. So I can also throw it away when I'm done with it and not have a continue to use resources. And those microservices typically run in these things we call containers. Dockers is a perfect example, which abstracts away from the OS and can run anywhere. They're dynamic, with automatic scaling, resiliency, and recovery. There's this model of blue-green where I can stand up blue version and green version and test them. Maybe I'm just doing testing new versioning in a primary and backup system, but I might also be actually using this for how it actually goes out and feeds the real world. So I'm actually taking 20% of my audience and putting them on this new green version and making sure that works before I cut over the rest to it. So part of my audience is on blue and part is on green. And that's a typical thing we see in the cloud where you never know exactly who's going to be getting what, because we're all looking at different versions of whatever is hosting our content when we're watching sometimes. Automated orchestration. So Kubernetes is a typical one that runs these containers and manages all this. But we really are also looking for automated orchestration that understands media and media workflows, and not just spinning up servers for scale, but actually understands all the pieces needed to make a complete workflow. Continuous delivery. So this is where we actually have continuous feedback loop where we're always having new releases, fast response, continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's not once every 6 months we do this. It's constantly happening. So we're always taking advantage of the latest thing. And because we're microservices, those upgrades, those things might be just one service at a time, rather than we waiting to do a whole release with everything in it. Lastly is this DevOps model. It stands for development and operations. It fundamentally represents a culture shift. It's about being collaborative. It comes from the agile development model, a full stack development model where someone actually owns the development, everything from the user experience to the lowest part of the core code. And that's what full stack is. So it's not like they just own a piece of it, they own the whole thing. And also we talk about DevOps as creating these 2 pizza teams. And this is where you don't have any teams larger than 2 pizzas serves you for a meeting. So basically building small, agile, task-focused teams to work on different things. It's very customer service oriented. Again, automating everything. There's 12-factor apps, so I'll provide a link to that later for everybody to understand what that means. And basically, what that means also is you own and run what you build, which means that whoever writes the code and builds this solution also owns it. You don't have somebody designing it, somebody building it, and somebody supporting it. It's all one and the same. And again, this fast fail model, when things don't work right, you're able to shut it down and try to start over again, something different. So it's a very iterative and fast process. So having gotten through cloud native, we're now at the top of the supplier pyramid. And this is where opportunity creation really happens. This is where processes are implemented and scheduled by cost. This is where whatever is running your system actually understands when you need it. It understands what you need, and it can figure out where to run that and when to run it to maximize efficiency and cost to allow you to do more and more workflow in the cloud at a lower cost and really explode the amount of business you do. So imagine you have a media check and transcode, and you know whether or not it's needed an hour from now or it's needed 2 weeks from now. And if it's needed 2 weeks from now, it runs in serverless or maybe a spot instance in off hours, maybe even another part of the world where the servers are cheaper. And when we get to a presentation, a few presentations from now, where we talk about actual use cases, I'm going to show you someone who's actually doing this, where they're spinning up 5,000 servers around the globe, and it's all done on the lowest cost they can find wherever they are to do a media workflow. It's really innovative, and it really shows you how you can leverage the cloud. Imagine dynamic redundancy. So I have a different level of redundancy in my system during the daytime than I do in prime time, than I do in the overnights, because I don't need to have 1+1 redundancy at 3 a.m. There's not that many people watching, but I definitely want 1+1 redundancy in prime time. And so if I have n+1 redundancy at other times, maybe the n is a different number in the daytime than it is in the overnight. It requires really good orchestration, but it's where you start seeing real cost savings because you've actually managed to match the cost of your operation to the value of that content at its place in the workflow at the time of day and where it's being delivered and who's watching it. And finally, lower cost creates opportunity, right? Once I can have lower costs, I can really utilize this long tail content in my archives. I can also create highly targeted niche services, and I can really have focused audience content. And that's where I really start to see real potential of the cloud. So having talked about your migration and talked about the vendor's migration, I think it's important to understand that this is more than just technology. Moving to the cloud, as we talked about in the previous presentation, is a business decision and not a technology decision. So where are we today? If you're working with legacy vendors, one of the benefits of a legacy vendor is they have a deep understanding of broadcast requirements and media workflows. They've built this expertise over many years, maybe decades. They know exactly what you need. Is there a solution lift and shift or not? You'll have to look and figure that out. Is it optimized? I don't know. That's worth checking. Initially, it won't be, right? So they're going to have to work to make those things happen. And again, look for their sales models. Is it perpetual licenses or is it an OpEx model? Do they have these high commissioning support fees? Because when they used to come on site and build these big systems, you had high commissioning fees, right? They're in the cloud. They're not traveling. I had a vendor say, well, I want to come on site and do this. It's like, no, there's nothing on site to do. It's in the cloud. Stop rethink the way you do your business, right? So, and really some of the vendors who are getting this are actually offering also as a managed service. And you may not want this as a managed service. You may want to license just the software and run it in your own cloud instances, which makes perfect sense. Or if they're running it as a managed service, then I'm guessing that they're likely to have a better handle on what cloud costs are than someone who isn't. So that might be a good thing to look for. If they're running as a managed service, it means they actually understand that. Look to see if they're actually leveraging cloud features and not a cost model or architecture. So if, what you really want with someone who's actually building architecture built around costs. So, what is their difficult decisions? If you're a vendor building systems today, you're still migrating maybe solutions to 2110 on-premise uncompressed IP video. And it's resources on making and continuing that evolution versus moving to the cloud and being cloud native. And you also have a slew of legacy customers and current customers who are demanding new features and capabilities. And how do you manage that against having to go back and rewrite your code from ground up to be refactored in cloud native? That's a very difficult decision for an existing vendor and technology supplier to make. And you need to look carefully at that and decide what that's worth to you as a customer and where they are in that journey. On the other hand, we have the cloud native vendors. And these are really being innovative with ground-up reinvention of NAM and playout for the cloud and now live production. We're seeing cost-driven architecture as implementation with right-sized microservices, containers, and on-demand and serverless instances. Things like where they can actually tag everything that's running and give it assignments so you can actually know where those costs are and attribute them directly back to each operational unit to improve operational efficiency within your organization. The cloud native orchestration we talked about for scaling redundancy and dynamic provisioning. A subscription sales model. So this is OpEx with usage-based pricing that really matches perhaps what's on the underlying cloud services. So you actually want an OpEx model that matches the duration of the services you're running in the cloud, so they align. You don't want, again, we talked about a minute ago, you don't want to be running a server for an hour, but have to buy a monthly license for the software that runs on it. And again, look for somebody who's doing faster releases and upgrades, maybe continual releases and upgrades, and do these new cloud native vendors actually have the feature set you need? And that becomes the biggest question. Is these new cloud native vendors, do they really understand you as a customer? Do they understand your workflows and your media requirements? Because they don't necessarily have the breadth of relationships to really understand what you might want. So you're going to have to look carefully at that. And you don't know what their development backlog is from existing customers, where they have to do all this work because they didn't understand all those things when they stepped into this. So look for those. Again, not an easy decision, but these are some of the things to look for. And again, this is more than just tech. We're an industry in transformation, and it's living in an era of uncertainty in the industry. In the last few years, we've seen this huge shift to OTT. We saw it coming maybe a decade ago, but it's really taken off and it's caused a lot of business model disruption in our business. It's hard to imagine that 3 years from now, things will settle down and we won't see even more disruption. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I just believe it's going to be there. So we have to be able to adapt to constant disruption and change and this uncertainty. That means we need optimized cloud solutions that really minimize these costs and empower innovation. We need to leverage cloud native, cloud first. We need to have a process reinvention, really a blue sky approach and not snowflakes. We don't want to bring this baggage with us to the cloud. We want to create workflows that work across all of our different requirements. So we're not building different workflows for every single channel, every single need. And these culture shifts happen. We need to embrace them because this is going to be a culture shift in our organization. It's going to be painful for some, it's going to be a thrill for others, but it's definitely going to be a culture shift. And we need to help everybody along in this journey as employees and partners in this. So cloud benefits are only realized when everyone is on board, right? Programming, marketing, engineering. We need to break down those silos, bring everybody together. We need to empower cross-discipline teams. That cloud center excellence we talked about early on in this presentation. And there's this concept of holacracy, self-management structure. There's a book there you're welcome to take a look at and read that really helps you get your teeth around something like this. So finally, our takeaways. Establish your vision and set your business goals. Plan for the cloud. Know your tenants. Be sure you have a secure system. Invest in your team. Follow that DevOps model. Build these two-piece teams that own what you build, and seek collaborative partners that match your vision and journey. Thank you very much. So we have a couple more webcasts coming up in this series. On May 13th, we'll be talking about a recipe for successful migration. And on June 15th, I'll be talking about cloud system case studies. You can also catch up on earlier episodes at our website, www.tagvs.com. So I'll take some questions. And Dana, do we have any questions? And we've got a couple questions here. Great. Okay, so Keith is asking, how can I tell if the vendor is simply lift and shift or if they're really cloud native? Great question. Thanks, Keith. All right, so first, stand up their system and look to see what's running in the cloud. So do a POC. Do a POC and monitor the cost for a month using real life workflows and content, or maybe just even a week. But you'll be able to see what's actually running. You better go and look into your CloudWatch and see actually what services are running, what's consuming it, and where those costs are occurring. I remember seeing vendors who had ingest servers running 24/7 when only ingesting an hour a day. That is not a very efficient use of the cloud. So you can actually see how efficiently they've orchestrated and managed their services in the cloud. Look to see if there's serverless and spot usage instead of persistent servers. So again, you can also see the kind of services they're running to see if they actually really are starting to leverage things that cloud native vendors would do. I look at their pricing models. Do they have a range of pricing models, and do those models align with the different pricing models in the cloud so you can match consumptions across those, and you can build those into your workflow? And can they tell you what their system is going to run in the cloud, how much it's going to cost? Because that'll tell you instantaneously that they've had some experience. How well do they scale? Can their systems scale up, and how do they scale in the cloud? Is their API readily available? Is it published on their website? What kind of third-party integrations do they support, especially for orchestration systems? And remember, all of these are merely considerations and not absolute litmus tests. You don't necessarily need or even want a vendor at the top of the journey or pyramid. The right choice for you is the one that provides you the capabilities that you need at the right price, including those cloud costs, and a support and roadmap that aligns with your journey. So don't look for the one everybody else is choosing because you think they're at the top of the pyramid and the best. Look for the one that actually aligns with you and is going to give you exactly what you want. And we have one more question here, right, Dana? Yeah, okay. So Clive is asking, what happens if I pick the wrong vendor? Don't do that. Well, actually, go ahead and do that. There's no harm in doing that because the beauty is you're in the cloud, right? If you had been building an on-premises system in the past, you would have gone and seen a bunch of vendors and done a demo, and then you made a commitment, and then you would have sent a purchase order, and then you would have planned out, you put in racks, and you put in electrical, and you put in HVAC, and the equipment would arrive, and you rack and stack it and cable it up and start provisioning and commissioning it and testing it and everything. And 12 months, 18 months later, you might finally actually cut it over and put it on air and find out how well it really works for your workflow, right? Those days are hopefully over. And that's the beauty of this, because we don't have to do forklift upgrades anymore in long-term committed deployments. You can stand up test systems in parallel in the cloud. I did a system recently where I did 10 different systems in parallel and compared their operating costs as well as the performance and functionality. And that was really easy to do, right? So you can actually test drive in the cloud in a way you could never have done before. Then look for workflows that avoid lock-in, right? Because that way I can change what I'm doing. How do I avoid lock-in? First is making sure that I have interoperable components, and so I have defined standards and demarcations so that, for example, all my playout systems are going to support BXF, so I don't have to worry about different traffic systems interfacing different playout systems. They're all going to meet at a common language in the middle defined by that API called BXF. And I have other APIs I'm going to use that I'm going to define how we exchange stuff, or maybe how we handle other things, media workflows and such. I look for licensing models to avoid lock-ins. If someone wants you to lock in for 3 years, is it because they're giving you a really good deal, or because they're scared that you're going to discover something and want to move away in 3 months? And ideally, you can run different solutions optimized for each channel you might actually have and workflow all this might violate the snowflake rule we talked about earlier, but it's not unusual to see at least one or two flavors of a workflow with different vendors and different solutions because they're more optimized for different parts of that. And all of us, that takes us to our next session where we talk about recipe for successful migration, where you'll figure out the right vendor before you commit. So I thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.